Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Jacques Berlinerblau, and I'm the director of the Center for Jewish Civilization in the Wall School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. I'd like to warmly welcome all of you to our day-long conference entitled Contemporary White Supremacy in America: What Are Its Links to the Nazi Past? This gathering draws upon and expands upon the path-breaking research of our distinguished faculty member, Father Patrick Desbois, the Braman Endowed Professor of the Practice of the Holocaust in the Center for Jewish Civilization. For those of you familiar with his research profile, Father Desbois poses countless critical questions about mass genocide, many of which are setting the agenda for scholars around the world. Today's panel focuses on another Desbois-inspired query, one that is deceptively difficult to answer. Namely, to what extent does this reemergence or reblossoming of white supremacist movements today in the United States actually draw upon Nazi ideation, propaganda, recruitment strategies, and even technologies of violence? Father Desbois' work studying the atrocities by ISIS perpetrated against the Yazidi people suggests that outside of the United States, these links are as real as they are ghastly. We are, however, also open to the possibility that in the United States, these links are more symbolic than substantive. Put differently, how seriously should we take one extremist's well-known quip that he endorsed, quote, non-ironic Nazism masquerading as ironic Nazism? Is what we are seeing today actually a resurgence of Nazism? Is it something else, or is it a mashup of hateful worldviews of which National Socialism is just one significant taproot? To probe this dilemma, we have assembled 5 panels today composed of scholars, journalists, activists, and public servants. We have also scheduled a noontime address about the relation of white nationalism to free speech. In short, we are canvassing our subject matter from a variety of angles, and we are so excited that you in the audience are going to share this event with us. Please consult your program for a detailed itinerary of the day's events. Please trust we would like you to stay for as much of it as you can, and to that end, there will be coffee and lunch served throughout. Before we begin, I'm going to read to you from Georgetown University's Free Speech and Expression Policy. It will be periodically put up on the screen, and this is the policy. Please note it. Thank you for coming to this event. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that not everyone may share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event respect the right of the speakers and the organizing department to share their views and ideas by not causing a disruption to the event's activities. At the conclusion of the event, there will be a question and answer session during which you may submit your questions and engage in dialogue. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question. In the interest of time, we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. We may be writing out questions just because the room is getting very, very large. At this moment, I was going to hand off to Lara Logan. I'm sorry to say she had a family emergency just last night, so she won't be joining us today. I will be conducting this interview. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And now I'm going to move and transmogrify to a moderator's position. Well, hello. I'm not Lara Logan. I'm so sorry. And she expresses her deep regret that she could not participate with us. We have a wonderful panel in front of us. I will draw your attention to the Georgetown Free Speech Policy, which should be up on the screen. There it goes. We are dedicated to having robust discussions today and hearing different viewpoints, but please remember that both panelists and audience members must do so in a respectful and non-physical way. The name of this panel is Modern White Power Movements, the Holocaust and Contemporary Anti-Semitism. We have 2 crack speakers with us today. They are Father Patrick Desbois and Mr. Christian Picciolini. So Father Desbois is president and founder of Yahad-In Unum, where he has interviewed more than 4,000 eyewitnesses to the executions of Jews and Roma by Nazis, and identified more than 1,500 execution sites with his team. In 2015, Desbois launched the initiative Action Yazidis, which seeks to uncover facts of the Yazidi genocide committed by ISIS. He is the former director of the National Service of French Bishops for Relations with Judaism and is presently advisor to the Commission of the Holy See for Religious Relations with the Jews. Father Desbois holds several degrees and honorary degrees. He is the recipient of the LBJ Moral Courage Award by the Holocaust Museum in Houston and the Lantos Human Rights Prize from the Lantos Foundation. He has written several books on his genocide research. We'll be seeing those titles. Let's put them up behind us because we're so incredibly well organized. Yes? Are those the books? Good, I can't see. Note to selves for our next conference. I should be able to see that. Several books on his genocide research, namely Holocaust by Bullets and In Broad Daylight, The Secret Procedures Behind the Holocaust by Bullets. He's also the winner of the 2008 National Jewish Book Award. Christian Picciolini is an award-winning television producer, public speaker, author, peace advocate, and reformed violent extremist. While working for IBM, Christian earned a degree in international relations from DePaul University and later began his own global media firm. In 2009, Mr. Picciolini co-founded Life After Hate, a nonprofit dedicated to helping counter racism and violent extremism. Currently, he is working to help build the world's first global network of extremism preventionists, attempting to disengage hate movements and other violent ideologies around the globe. His memoir, White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out, details his involvement in an eventual exit from the early American white supremacist skinhead movement. Thank you both for joining us today, and if we could warmly welcome them with some applause, that would be great. All right, good morning, everyone. One quick note, this is technically called a manel. We don't do manels in the Center for Jewish Civilization. That's a panel with only men, so we apologize, but we only found out about the change to Ms. Logan's schedule at about 7 o'clock this morning. So deep apologies. There will be no more manels, and there are never manels in our unit. Sorry about the manels to my co-speakers. All right, today we're going to triangulate between three types of violent extremists that our panelists research and write about. Let's just understand who they are. Contemporary white supremacists in the United States, which Mr. Picciolini draws attention to. Nazis from 1939 to 1945, and unfortunately before and beyond, and modern-day ISIS perpetrators. So we're going to start with Mr. Picciolini. Can you draw a portrait of a white supremacist in America? Now, I know it's hard. There's a lot of differences amongst them. But if you were to identify some core qualities of your individual white supremacist today, tell us a little bit about that, please.
Absolutely a tough question because it really spans all different social classes and you know, it's more heavily male than female. But I would say that the consistency within all the people that I've worked with, and I've worked with hundreds of people to help them disengage from hate movements, is that there is always some form of trauma or pain or shame that happened before that led them there. That ideology was not the primary driver that led them to a movement. It was instead a search for identity, community, and purpose.
Can you give us like one quick example?
Yeah, so you know, I've worked with 14-year-old boys and girls to 70-year-old men, typically middle class. I think the misnomer is that they come from broken homes, that you know, the stereotype of what I used to be, a skinhead, is for some people still what they think of when they think of white supremacy, when in fact what I'm seeing is more of middle class upbringing, where racism isn't part of that upbringing, where it's almost a rebellion against the progressive parents, and more male than female, but typically between the ages of 14 and 18 is when they're being recruited, and typically disengaging shortly after that. But if they don't disengage at that point, then we see them staying for much longer.
That's fascinating. You're saying you're noticing that racism is not part of the upbringing. It's something that comes around later.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are studies that say that, you know, people learn it in the home as young as 1 or 2 years old and can manifest it as young as 3. But typically what I'm seeing is that it's learned outside of the home. That because of the internet, there are so many young, marginalized people who are looking for answers that the propaganda is very easy to find, and it does fill a lot of those voids.
Thank you. Father Desbois, start with an ISIS fighter.
An ISIS fighter is complicated because I will give you an example. I interviewed a girl, a Yazidi girl. She has been sold to an Islamic judge. So she was with him during 8 months. And so every morning they went at 8 o'clock in a jail. They were choosing who to torture. We had 3 methodologies of torture. And at the end of the day, he had to choose if he gave death penalty or not. And he made, under her eyes, 75 beheadings only in Aleppo. And I will never forget, because she explained also, she was also present when they burnt alive a pilot from Jordan. And at the end of 8 hours of interview, we asked her, did you cry? What did you feel? And she said, I felt nothing. I was ISIS. And so what I would say from the criminals of ISIS is that they don't feel anything when they kill. It's the banality of crime. It's not the banality of hate. And also the fact that they see that every day on screens. There are screens, because when there is a public death penalty, they call them to come. So it's like a show. So it's a banality of death for any reason. I will never forget, I asked the woman, in which case your husband had the right to kill a woman. She told me, by example, if the bag was too much shining, if she had a bag was too much shining, or if she forgot a glove. So, and all that was said very quietly, without feeling, without crying. And so all our investigations ask us to be very cold because they speak about crimes it's very banal.
Did you notice anything, like you see these ISIS, they're usually men, I would imagine, that you've worked with. Is there something about their past sociologically, socioeconomically, in terms of the abuse that Mr. Picciolini spoke of, that you keep saying, yep, that's the quality, it keeps showing up, or are they all different?
Me, I would say they are a little bit different because they have been proposed to be a Superman or a Superwoman, an Übermensch. They have been connected, most of them, by internet from their home. They could come from America, they could come from Canada, they could come from France and Germany and Jordan and anywhere. But I will give you an example. I had somebody, I cannot divulgate the name, he was working with me, he was originally Christian. And he had a problem of drugs and so on. And suddenly, I didn't see him back. And I asked, where is he? And they told me, he's in Syria. And he was in Hezbollah. So I contacted him by Facebook, and he said, you don't know, now I am cleaning the planet. So the fact is to pass to be nobody to be a Superman. And a Superman will legalize to kill. So like a James Bond. And so it's what I would say in common is that suddenly they are somebody. It's why for them to come back to normality is to come back to normal and boring life.
Do they ever use this term, Übermensch?
Superman, yeah. Superman. They have their own terminology. They classify all people who are not good as kufar. It means non-believer. And when somebody is declared kufar, it's legal to kill him.
Fascinating. All right, so let's now move to the level of community. So we've looked at some individual aspects of these folks. Let's move to community. I surmise that these groups make much of brotherhood, a sense of belonging, kinship. Father Desbois, can you draw parallels between those you studied in ISIS and in Eastern Europe and how they become communally inducted into this type of hatred towards particular groups?
What is special in ISIS is that when they have a group of children, by example, we train to put bombs or to shoot, or they always choose one will be an emir, a chief. And this boy, he has the right even to torture the others. So it's a community, but always with one of them who is above. They are not confident that they will stay with them. And for Holocaust, I would say, suddenly, I interviewed, by example, a man. He was from Ukraine. He was from Romania, and his father was the chief of propaganda. And he said that they decided every day which Jews they will kill. And I would say and he said, we were taking this decision, we went to a farm, they were killing the people, and he said, me and my mom with baskets, we took out all the belongings. We say that also in a very banal way. So I see both in ISIS, both in the killers of Eastern Europe, always strong leadership. They believe in a leader.
Interesting. So we're going to keep pinging back and forth. Mr. Picciolini, leadership?
As far as leadership goes, there's always been a desperate struggle within the white supremacist movement in the United States. And there's always been a lot of infighting as well between the different groups. And that's typical when you have men with these type A personalities who are trying to better each other but don't really have the foundation to logically or rationally work through things, which was the case with most of the people that I had met when I was in the white supremacist movement, that there was a serious lack of self-confidence, but it was not something that was ever shown because it wasn't the environment where you would do that. But I do very much believe that most young people, and typically it is from the ages of 13 to 18 where they become indoctrinated, it's not because of the ideology, it is because of a search for the brotherhood, that identity, and that purpose. At an age when young people are breaking away from their parents and establishing themselves as individuals, if there are what I call potholes in their path, those traumas, the shame, could be anything from abandonment to loss to mental illness to privilege even, or poverty. Those things in life that deviate our path and send us to the fringes, where there are narratives waiting for us, and like Father Desbois said, that make us feel like a Superman. They tell them they're the saviors, the warriors. That's their purpose, that they must do this.
A divine vocation, it's connected to God or not?
Not necessarily to God, but to a greater purpose of saving the white race from what they think is a genocide that's happening. For young people who are idealistic, but may also be very uncertain and broken in some regard, that promise of paradise, essentially, of saving the white race and being a warrior, is sometimes the only thing in their life that has given them purpose. So they give it everything. And to a point that Father Desbois made, the same thing is happening with the white nationalist movement as far as this desensitization process, except it's happening online through memes. So while they're inviting young ISIS members to the square to watch these beheadings, what's happening online is young people are being desensitized on places like 4chan and 8chan, these forums, through Holocaust denial memes and through the use of very vulgar terms over and over and over until they become so desensitized to it that they start to participate in it.
A question for you, for both of you. A classic paradigm in the sociology of deviance is, why do young people join gangs, street gangs in the United States? And the research kept showing pretty consistently because they want a sense of community, right? The gang is family, right? The gang is a surrogate communal structure for them. Is this something that, are these young men usually that you look at, do they just need community? And why is their community broken to begin with? Where are they coming from that they lack?
I don't think it's just that they need community. I do believe it is this kind of three levels of identity. Who am I? And community, where do I belong? And then purpose, what am I supposed to do with my life? But that is, I think, the main attraction. And certainly anybody who's had trauma in their life, there are millions of people who don't become extremists. And you have to ask yourself why. Why is that the case? And I do believe that environmentally speaking, if there are support structures, if there are outlets, if there are opportunities to fulfill that identity, community, and purpose, other than filling it with extremist ideology to do that, then those people do survive. They do make it. But also extremist activities can be drug abuse, suicide, school shootings, those types of things, and how they manifest, whether it's neo-Nazism or ISIS or a gang or suicide, is really kind of the environmental influence that is causing them to go in that direction. I think that those are all extremist lifestyles.
Now, Father Desbois, in your research, if we can go back to the killing fields between 1939 and 1945, maybe you could explain to the audience precisely the type of murderer, mass murderer you're looking at, and then talk to us about community, just so they can refamiliarize themselves with your work.
First, when a unit of killers arrive in a village, so German or from anywhere, they have a protocol in 20 points. They are working hardly with the neighbors. You have no mass crime, no genocide without the neighbors. So you need to split the neighbors. You choose the Jews to die and the neighbors to be alive. So suddenly the neighbors are over-evaluated because they are chosen also to be alive that day. You need them. You need them to close the roads. You need them to dig a mass grave. You need them to bring the Jews in cart and horses because there is no machine to bring them. You need them to bury the people, etc., etc., and it must be finished in time in the evening because the killers never sleep in a village. So the killers who did that job in post-Soviet Union were making that like a very usual job, I would say. They did that every day during 3 years. So it was job as usual, job as usual. So the only problem is, by example, we had a cold breakfast. We had a very cold breakfast. Or by example, I found the testimony of a driver. He was delivering food and sandwiches to the shooters in Babi Yar. You know, in Babi Yar, they shot 35,000 Jews. But his business was to bring sandwiches. So he was driving in the middle of the naked Jews to join a place for a buffet to put the sandwiches, and he put the tea. And suddenly the tea was without vodka because the chief of the killers say if they drink, they will not finish the shooting. And so the shooters made a complaint, we have not enough vodka in the tea. So I say that because you have two lives in a killing. You have the daily life of the killers who are much worried about their own life and doesn't see the others as human beings. Absolutely not. And their protocol of killings. But they need thousands and thousands of neighbors. Without a neighbor, you cannot kill people. And so it's not a question of guilt, it's also a question of practical question. Because it's a small group who has to kill a lot of people in 1 or 2 or 3 days. And so the people we interviewed were used to keep the Jews or to dig the mass grave or to fulfill the mass grave or to sell the belonging, etc. And the problem is that when they speak about that, even 70 years after, if they participated to a killing, they say it easily because it was legal to kill a Jew and a Gypsy. It was legal. But if they stole something in a farm, if they stole the money or belongings, they don't want to say it because it was illegal. So for me, the problem is that also the legality is framing the conscience, even 70 years after. It's legal to kill, so you can say it today in front of a TV. But if you stole something, no, I never stole anything. But to kill a baby or to kill a grandma, you can say it. So what I saw is that these groups, they express very clearly what was the law. It's legal to kill these people, it's not legal to kill these people. And until now, people who are involved in that don't feel absolutely guilty. I never met anybody who felt guilty.
All right, so let's linger on this point of community. Christian, could you tell us about a community building exercise that you notice amongst these groups? And then I want to ask Father Desbois about ISIS and community building, and then we'll go to this third group, which might be very different because they sound very lone wolfish in a way to me, but maybe I haven't misunderstood. What's a community building exercise?
Well, it was different in my day. I disengaged over 23 years ago, and it was a very face-to-face situation back then. We didn't have the internet, so rallies were our community points. Concerts were our social networks. I was in a band that made white power music, and concerts were our way to gather in a forum. So people would come from all over the country to do that. Today, I really do believe the internet is providing those types of spaces. Everything from forums to even gaming platforms and rallies.
What are the gaming platforms?
So what's happening over gaming platforms is the multiplayer online gaming where they're talking to each other on headsets. They're using those platforms to recruit young people because they recognize that typically marginalized young people are gathering on online platforms to find that community, that they may not establish those relationships in real life.
We're going to have a fantastic panel later today led by my colleague Jessica Roda on music and the strategies of recruitment for these extremist groups. But since you were in that world, could you tell us a little bit about your musical moments in your youth?
Oh boy. You know, they were a place to really attract some of the most broken, but also wanting young people who wanted to belong, who were looking for something to fill. And what I did was I filled people with propaganda through my music. It was instruction for violence. It was conspiracy theory. It was almost a manual for how to act as a part of that movement. And what I saw was that the music and alcohol, of course, was a mixture of that at concerts. That fuel, it was almost like a pep rally for Nazis. It was the thing that they needed to see that they weren't alone, to see that they actually were involved in something and had some agency. Nowadays, they don't really need those physical activities because the internet is essentially a 24-hour hate buffet if you really know where to look, and sometimes it's not hard to find this. So I really do feel that technology has filled that gap today as far as making them feel the perception of community, because they can have whatever persona they want, even if they do feel marginalized in real life.
And the genre of the music, is it speed metal? I mean, that's what it sounds
No.
like to me.
So my genre of music back then, and music is, I think, less important today than it was. It was punk rock or yeah, hardcore music. But it was a way, that was our way to distribute propaganda to young people. We knew that they weren't going to read books in Mein Kampf. We knew that they weren't going to come to meetings, but they would listen to music, and music was something that could be easily passed around as propaganda.
Thank you, Father Desbois. In the ISIS group, community building exercises, and then we'll speak about...
In an ISIS group, one key is to cut the group from anybody else. For example, I followed a unit of 31 young boys trained artillerysts. Doing 1 year and a half, they had no connection with anybody. They were closed in an Islamic school, and not 1 minute of freedom. We have to wake up at 4 o'clock. They begin with physical training of hours after prayers, etc. And on evening, they have 2 hours of video about bombings and shootings and victory. So they have no news on the planet. So to bring a group, you must not give 1 minute of freedom. You must train them with competition and cut them from any information from outside. They knew nothing. They had no access to internet outside of the group, no news of the planet. I say that because today, when we have to liberate somebody from ISIS, the first phone contact from the smugglers, he says, no, ISIS is winning. We are everywhere. We are the best. And you cannot even explain today they are defeated. They know nothing. So I would say it's like a very sectarian movement. They have no idea what happens in the planet except their own bombing and shooting. And so it's to cut them. And also after, never to split the group. For example, these 31 people, they have been together since the first day of ISIS until the end of the day.
Tell us about singing, praying, poetry as a group.
Poetry, you know, in ISIS is very, very weak. And very weak. Singing, they have all their official singings, all their official songs, connected them to Baghdadi, connected them to the victory of ISIS, to connected them to also there is no video of ISIS without music. And it's always the same music. When we hear the music, we know it's ISIS. So ISIS, the music, I would say, is more like a signal to say we are ISIS. And I would say during the interview, nobody that I interviewed, we have interviewed 300, 600 ISIS, 360, and nobody has accepted to sing. Because it's like a secret song.
I see. They wouldn't sing for you mean?
Yeah.
They wouldn't do it?
Never, never.
All right, now let's go to 1939, 1945, and some of the Eastern European villages you look at. Are there community building exercises amongst what seem to me freelance murderers, but maybe there's something that I haven't that I've misunderstood?
Me, I would say yes. When they, by example, I give an example. In one village, they decided to kill the Jews and to force them to dance before, and they put music. But they forced all the village to watch the dancing, and when the dancing was finished, say now you come to the killing. So I would say they bring all the neighbors as a community of spectators and actors. So to be spectator of crime and actors is part of the community building, because you are all together in the crime. More you see the crime, more you see it from near, less you will speak. More a crime is public, more the secret is strong. It's why it's like a little bit in a gang. When you are in a crime together, who will speak?
All right. Oh, yes, Mr. Pickett.
Well, I mean, it's also interesting because in the white nationalist movement, it's also about isolation. It's also about, you know, removing the facts of what are happening in the real world and making them a part of something that's only driven by their narrative.
Yep.
To remove them, to, you know, we call them bubbles today, but they essentially are taking marginalized people and marginalizing them even further in a bubble. And I think, you know, the interesting thing that you said, where they make the neighbors participate in some way, that's a tactic of empowering them, but also making them afraid that that could happen to them, so it keeps them loyal. But you know, it fools them into thinking that they're actually being empowered to do this, and their continued work will keep saving them.
Right. I'm going to quote the great Hannah Arendt in Eichmann in Jerusalem. As she thought about Eichmann, she said he was like a repository of human interest stories of the very worst type. He would tell stories and the entire courtroom would be traumatized. Unfortunately, the two of you have plenty of those stories. So we're going to go anecdotal for a moment. Mr. Picciolini, as you look back at your time in the Rise Above movement, is there a moment you look back on that sort of encapsulates the dark, awful truth about these groups? And then I'm going to ask.
Sure. I wasn't a member of the Rise Above movement. It was long after my time. I was a neo-Nazi skinhead, and you know, the most common theme was that people were dealing with issues that nobody else in that group knew about. And they were always putting up this armor to cover that. And the armor was both to protect them, but also to hurt other people. It was as if the projection of self-hatred was their hatred. And in every case, I almost feel that was the truth, that it was less about the hatred of anybody else, but more about self-hatred. You know, anecdotally for me, it really, when I started to receive compassion from the people that I least deserved it from, it was the most powerful thing for me, because I had been kept in this hole where I didn't interact and have any meaningful contact with the people I thought I hated. And since I was recruited at 14 years old, I never even before then had the opportunity to meet the people that I thought I hated. When I opened a store, a business, it was a record store to sell racist music when I was 21 years old. That was the first opportunity that I had to have meaningful interactions with people. And it suddenly destroyed the demonization that I had held, and it replaced it with humanization. And I suddenly started to receive compassion from people who knew exactly who I was, but also maybe saw something inside of me that I hadn't
Who were
seen.
these people?
They were customers. They were, Jewish people. They were African Americans. They were gay people who were coming into my record store to buy music. I was selling white power music, but I also had a corner of hip hop and punk rock and heavy metal. I couldn't walk into the city hall and ask for a business license to sell racist music, so I sold everything. But I never intended to sell that music. I never intended anybody to come in and buy it, and they did. And they knew who I was. I was a very visible person in the 80s and 90s as far as my ideology goes. And they came in knowing who I was and did not destroy my store. They didn't punch me. They didn't protest. They didn't threaten my family. And instead, they came in to try and challenge me by being compassionate.
Was stocking that music your unconscious cry for help or for release? I mean, why would you even have such music in such a place?
To get a business license, I think
get
at
a
that
business
time.
license,
I really wasn't thinking about that, but I think secretly, here's the thing: is I don't know. Looking back now, 30 years later, I don't know that I hated anybody else but myself at the time, and I don't know that I did not feel guilt every time I said something and every time I did something to hurt somebody. I did. I just, at that point, what was most important to me was belonging, was feeling like I had some agency, some purpose in the world, because I had felt completely abandoned before then and did not feel like I had any place in the world. And suddenly, a man, who was twice my age, who happened to be America's first neo-Nazi skinhead, suddenly approached me and drew me in. He recognized, because he was a brilliant recruiter, he recognized how vulnerable I was because I was missing identity, community, and purpose. And he promised me that paradise the same way that the emirs promise paradise or the recruiters promise paradise to ISIS fighters. If you do this, if you take this sword and you fight for something of great purpose, you are a hero.
Father Desbois?
Yeah. For me, the darkest surprise in all the investigation was there is no pure hate. It's always hate, sex, and money. I say that because when I saw, by example, when I found that there were sex slaves in the Gestapo, and that these sex slaves were available for anybody, and that they were Jew sex slaves, and they were pregnant, and we never saw, I never saw pure hate. And I never found a place where the SS killed a Jewish family, find gold, and say, no, we are a non-profit, the SS, we don't touch the gold, we are only here to kill the people. And I say that because in the official topic, Himmler said he was very proud that the SS never took a gold coin. It's completely false. So there is a gap between this discourse of pure hate and hate in the practice. Hate in the practice is also with sex and money. And when they arrested people, the main obsession was where is the gold coin, and they could torture people to know where was the money and so on, even losing time for that. And I will never forget, in one place, by example, the shooting was finished, so one shooter, it was very cold, it was in winter, he came to a family because it was warm, and I interviewed the family, and the guy, he was speaking, and suddenly he took from his pocket 250 grams of gold teeth that he has taken for the dead, and he said, if I don't sell them now, I will not be able to keep them in the Gestapo. So everywhere, so the same in Sobibor, I saw there was a place outside with a guard selling gold teeth against vodka. And so suddenly you have the dark part of Holocaust with hate, sex, and money. And for the ISIS people, it's exactly the same. I will never forget one French, he received an SMS from his brother, who was ISIS, and wanted to blow himself a suicide bomber, and he asked him to come back. And his brother told him, you don't know, I have a house more than $1 million, and I have all the girls I want. So I say that because I think it's a mistake to think it's pure hate.
Hate is exhausting.
Yeah, hate
is
exactly.
exhausting, and it's important for leaders in these movements to incentivize people to commit the hate with things like that. So, I mean, in the white nationalist movement, there are ways that they spotlight certain people, where they put them on a pedestal to empower them to continue to do that. Because hate really is very tiring, and internally you question yourself. But for the people who are the most desperate, it's like leading the horse with the carrot and the stick. You will continue to hate, and I will continue to reward you, and those rewards will be small. But the hope is always there, because there really is no other. There's nothing else in their lives most times that fill them with that kind of happiness and purpose.
But pure hate group, I think it's a mistake of analysis. I remember I interviewed a child, he was participating in torture over children. And so I am the good guy to interview, but there's another guy who is the bad guy. And so he raised him question. He said, "Did you receive money every day for that?" He said, "Of course." So suddenly it was not only torture, it was also money. And for a child at that period was heavy. So I say, they are criminals. So it's, at the end, it's a crime. So sex and money, and I would say huge violence against the girls and women. You know, when we interview and excise this person, the main problem is to put a microphone because he doesn't want a girl to approach him. It must be a male. So I will never forget, I interviewed a child. He was 9 years old. He was brainwashed. He was not Muslim, but he has been brainwashed to be ISIS. So 9 years old, it's a child. So a girl is working for us, and she wanted to put a microphone. He began to yell, "No girl, no girl." And we understood he was still ISIS.
Christian, Professor Lower later is going to lead a panel, Professor Summer is going to lead a panel on gender. How oddly gendered are these spaces that you entered of young neo-Nazi men, or are they more non-gendered than we know?
I've seen, it's certainly much heavier males being in these movements. But lately what I've seen is that they've started to recruit young women to be the propagandists, to be the mouthpieces for the movement because, of course, pretty young girls attract young men. And they also seem less abrasive. So there's been a push to really make the ideology more palatable. They've changed the words, they've softened the language to try and get it into the mainstream, and part of the idea of having a female or a young girl promote this propaganda is to try and kind of sneak it in and make it seem less hateful.
This is a due diligence question. Father Desbois has told us that among ISIS there's this ideology of purity, but sex, money, drugs, it's really also driving it as it is in all human affairs. The answer seems obvious to me. I just want to check in these groups that you're familiar with. These themes are there, be it people happy to make as much money as they can in any way possible, trafficking in drugs, maybe even dealing with people they're supposed not to like because they can make a quick buck out of it.
Sure. Drugs, there are different segments of the white supremacist movement. There are some groups that are more criminally driven through sex trafficking and drugs, more of the prison gang type Aryan Brotherhood, and then their offshoot outside of prison. It really is about how they pitch themselves. There are certain groups within the white supremacist movement that would claim they're not white supremacists, that they are about pride. And while there is absolutely nothing wrong with being proud of who you are, I think behind closed doors, it really is about pointing out the enemies or the people that they believe are the threats.
Could you give
to
us the
that
names
pride.
of those groups, just so everyone knows who you're speaking about?
They changed so frequently, but even in my day, it was about white, publicly facing, it was about white pride instead of white power. In the 70s, it went, the American Nazi Party in the 60s took it from Sieg Heil to white power, and then we took it from white power to white pride, and now what's happening is they've completely dropped, those types of words and are just saying, we just want to be able to appreciate our culture. But behind closed doors, because there are certainly, no ways to appreciate white culture in America. It's almost everywhere you go. It's forced down your throat. So, what happens is that behind closed doors, though, the agenda changes. With the leaders, they're not toning down the language. It harkens back to the same things that I used to say. But as a marketing tool, it is a very scrubbed ideology that does not profess to be white supremacist, but absolutely over time the ideology alienates and wants to hurt and marginalize other minority groups.
Right. Prior to the final question, I'm just going to add one because we're doing very, very well on time. Let's talk very quickly about the internet and the sheer word and thought-defying power of this medium to promulgate hate. Obviously, this is only germane to ISIS, but I'm going to ask you another question, Father Desbois. First, tell us a little bit about ISIS and the internet, and then if Nazis had the internet, that's the question I want to add. What would they have done with it? So go ahead.
For me, the common point between the shooters from the Einsatzgruppen and ISIS is that they love the pictures. We have found 400 pictures of shooting, and it was not propaganda pictures, it was family souvenir. I always remember this shooter, he He sent a picture of a killing of Jews. They want to be in the picture. Even if they are not shooting, they want to be in the picture. And he said, you see, my dear love, we are playing with Jewish children like balloons and throwing them in air and shooting. Imagine if we don't do that, what we will do in Germany for next generation. It was an obsession with pictures because the picture of hero, like you killed an elephant, but you didn't kill an elephant, you killed a Jew, so you want to be in the picture. And ISIS, I would say, there is no shooting, there is no beheading, there is no crucifixion without telephone and professional cameraman to export that. So I would say what I discovered is more you export your crimes, less people will speak about it. Because a normal person cannot follow every day these crimes. It's unbearable. But people want to join. So internet, I would say, and ISIS are completely married. Even today, so ISIS has been declared dead, but I can send you the last video they published yesterday. So it's a dead, we're still publishing. And I think if the Nazi had internet, they would publish every day what they did. Not everything. ISIS never published the rapes. ISIS never published that they take the money and they are raping the girls. They publish only the bombing, the beheading, and their victory. So not the other part. And I think if every day we receive the news from Auschwitz that a new train arrived, and again a woman died, and again a child has been gassed, most of the population say, oh, it's awful, I cannot see that anymore, you know, we know that, and let's speak of something else, let's go to Cancun. And so...
kind of like what's happening now with all the news we're being bombarded with.
And so I think also something that I discovered, it was more you make it public, more it will be secret. There is a connection between publicity and the secret. Because majority of the population want to sleep well and say, no, we don't want to hear every day about beheading and crucifixion and that. Even me, Andre, who is here, is sending me every day the video of ISIS. So I can tell you, some morning I don't open them. Today I didn't look at them, for example. And I received 5 files of video. So, but imagine if I receive 5 files of Auschwitz by the SS, perhaps also I will not open them again after 2-3 years. So I say that because there's a common sense about killings today, media and internet. More you show yourself violent and killing, more your followers will say, oh, wonderful, I want to join, I want to clean the planet. And more the regular people say, no, it's disgusting, I cannot follow that.
So Christian, it seems that some of these white supremacist groups in the United States actually want to hide what they're doing publicly. No, we're just a pride group, that's it. We've renounced violence, was never part of our DNA. Anyhow, is there so I guess it's different amongst different groups. What types of groups are interested in sterilizing or cleaning up their image, and what types of groups go the full ISIS and want to show you the worst, most provocative images?
So, you know, there are groups within the white nationalist movement that are very much like ISIS, that make, you know, these same videos that are responsible for, you know, the murder of at least 5 people in the last year and a half. A group called Atomwaffen Division, which is, you know, they revere Hitler and George Lincoln Rockwell of the American Nazi Party, and also Charles Manson, who they believe wanted to initiate a race war. So those are the, you know, and Rise Above movement is a group that has been, members have been arrested going to Ukraine to train in paramilitary camps with a group called the Azov Battalion, which is a very large Panzer-like division, tank division there. And they were arrested by the FBI. They were also part of the Charlottesville rally. So, I mean, you know, these groups kind of come together. We're seeing the more mainstreaming of this ideology happening with groups that are part of the white identity movement that's been influenced by the Generation Identitaire movement in France, where they've really kind of sanitized, they've made it almost like a Boy Scout group, almost like a conservative political movement. You know, almost like the alt-right started as, or it was being pitched as kind of an alternative to conservatism. This is now being pitched as not an alternative to it, but an actual part of the conservative mainstream that, you know, professing that white males are being marginalized more than anybody else. that they don't have a place to belong. And they really are playing to the frustrations of young white males who maybe, are confused about their place in life.
All right, great. Now, our final frame of the discussion is in honor of, we believe we have law enforcement officials that are attending that want to learn from these two gentlemen. So this is what we're going to speak about. Mr. Picciolini, you were inside these groups. Father Desbois, you interview these figures and the perpetrators of violence. So what we thought would be interesting for some of our audience members to learn about is what goes wrong in these groups. What are the natural tension and flashpoints within the groups which could be exploited by people who want to destabilize these groups towards the end of possibly combating what seems to be a resurgence of such types of communities? So let's start with Mr. Picciolini.
What I do today is not that different than what I did 25 years ago. I am still a recruiter of young, vulnerable people. And I am still trying to win their hearts and minds and promise them paradise, but now I try and deliver that through resilience. So I think the biggest disruption for this is not to combat the ideology. You can't win against an illogical ideology. You just can't. There's nothing you can say. No fact that you can give somebody who is entrenched in this that will change their mind. Instead, it has to be an emotional change, and it has to be a physical change, and replace that identity, community, and purpose. Offer opportunities. So maybe this is not a law enforcement question. It's, I think, this is a humanity question. How do we provide opportunities? How do we identify the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, the most broken who might be looking for those things, and replace that with positive pathways? As far as law enforcement goes, they have always had a hard time making money, always. However, we talked about, you mentioned lone wolves, and I do believe that there are people who are self-radicalized, but I also believe that they are part of a larger movement that has made the whole lone wolf strategy part of their process. They want people to not associate with groups. It's easier for law enforcement to take down a group if there's a leader and if there's an infrastructure. So they do encourage people to be alone. So I would say, we need to disrupt the things where they do raise money, and that is through crowd funding accounts and things like that. But also that they're tied internationally. This is not an American problem. I mean, we've seen that for decades. And I can tell you that in 1991, I had people from Libya contact me that were representing Muammar Gaddafi, who wanted to bring me to Tripoli to fund my revolution against the Jews here in America. It is just a matter of time. It is just a matter of time before white nationalists and ISIS begin working together, because if you really think about it, their number one enemy is the Jew.
Father Desbois, you want to follow up?
So that I totally agree that they are first an international planet in their mind. They don't care the nations. So a boy from Pakistan can speak from a boy to France, or a boy from America. And for us it's complicated because we still think nation by nation. As I say, I travel a lot, so when I hear people say it's the fault of Trump, when I go to Germany, they say it's the fault of Mrs. Merkel. It's the fault in France, they say it's the fault of Macron. But these children, they don't care, the president, and that they connect between each other. So I would say their weakness is that they try, ISIS and all these groups are trying to brainwash children, because they are always thinking far away. And actually, by example, in my places in Iraq, we try to bring back 400 children to their identity. These 400 children have been brainwashed, have been in terrorist camps, are not Muslim originally, and have been killing people. So I think if you can programmate a child, you can also deprogrammate a child. By loving him, by reintegrating in family, by teaching him something else, because he knows nothing against only the language of the group, and also to prepare for a job. So I think we have not to forget that for them, the teenagers are the target. They believe in young people, these groups.
Okay, so we're going to continue this discussion. However, on your seats, you might notice some white cards. We'd like you to write whatever questions you have. They're going to be handed to me, and then that's going to fuel our Q&A. I'd like to go back to something that you said, Mr. Picciolini. By the way, you'll see students from the Center for Jewish Civilization coming around to collect your cards. Please write legibly so that I can read. So you said something about alpha males. And I had worked with a group that shall remain nameless, not a violent group, and I noticed that it did have a preponderance of alpha males, and it kept splitting into smaller and smaller and smaller groups as a result. And then I want to ask Father Desbois the same question about alpha males and ISIS. What's the downside of too many alpha males, and is that a problem that one finds in these sorts of units?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There is a lot of infighting because of that, because they don't really they haven't built the critical thinking skills or the collaboration skills, and don't really understand how to lead. Most of them, I mean, I'm certainly generalizing. There are very smart people in these movements. But I think that kind of jealousy will split off, and those alpha males, the type A's, will then go and try and start their own group, which is both good and also dangerous. It's good because there's never any sense of cohesion in these movements because of that friction that develops. But it's also bad because it does create this environment of lone wolves where there isn't and I'm putting up air quotes, a responsible leader to keep people in line. So there are people doing whatever they want. So it's both a very dangerous thing, but also a tool that we can use because it is so fractured to continue to fracture it.
Just out of the blue, Spike Lee's Black Klansman, a movie we were watching with our Blacks and Jews course, there seems to be that happening within this group. There are two guys there that are fighting for the leadership of the group, and one is much more radical. Of course, it ultimately explodes. Did that portrait strike you as realistic or useful in terms of thinking about these groups, or was it just Hollywood?
No, I mean, it's accurate. I mean, there's always been a lot of infighting and a lot of fracture within, I think, all extremist movements, because there's always somebody who wants to be more extreme than somebody else and go in a different direction. So I think that that's a pretty accurate depiction. Yeah, I mean, there was a sense of wanting to work with other people. There was always a drive to unify all the disparate groups that were part of this movement, but it's always failed because there's always been a lot of ego.
Yeah.
Father Desbois, alpha males and ISIS, a problem?
Not so much, because ISIS is very decentralized. People think that Baghdadi phones an SMS to somebody will make a bomb. But in fact, the guy who put a bomb, for example, he killed 2 policemen in their home in France. He entered in their home, he killed the male and the female policeman, and after he went in the bathroom and he made a video that he says he did that in the name of ISIS, and he gave a list of people it's legal to kill now. So they refer to ISIS after crime. So I say that because ISIS is really a criminal organization. Crime is the key, more than hate. So when you do the crime, you are from the group, and you can say, I did that in the name of Baghdadi. I say that because, for example, when the truck was killing 83 people in Nice, in France, people say it's a lone wolf. It's an old wolf. Suddenly, 6 months after, we arrest 6 people, 8 people were with him. So in France, we believe less and less in lone wolf. They appear as lone wolf, but they are not. And so I will never forget these 2 teenagers who killed the priest. So they made a beheading in the church, and after we learned by internet, they only connected through internet. But after we learned, they tried 5 times to do it before. So from a lone wolf and 2 teenagers, you have a very structured affair. But they are not. They are very modern ISIS. Decentralization and confidence locally is great, unfortunately.
All right, we have some great questions. Before we get to them, do the 2 of you want to ask one another something?
I think we asked all those questions
Really?
before.
Okay.
I don't know if you do. I'm
Father
happy.
Desbois, is there a question?
So I would say, why do you think, I will ask you a very unpolitically correct question, because I'm not a diplomat, so I refuse to be diplomat. And so I would say we see Islamic hate crimes in many countries. In France, I must say Islamic is radical Islam, of course it's ISIS, Britain and that. Why do you think there are so few in America and more white hate groups?
Well, I think that in America, our systemic racism empowers it. I also believe that a lot of the policies that we're hearing about today and debating they mirror some of the same things that I used to say 30 years ago, as far as building a wall and isolating ourselves, as far as deporting people who we thought were not worthy of being in the American white homeland. So I would say that because our systems, our institutions empower whites, that's why we're seeing that level of hatred here against other non-whites versus other countries.
All right, let's get to these questions. My thanks to the audience for some really, really good ones. For both of you, as a parent, how does one prevent one's teenage boy or girl from being inducted into white supremacy or ISIS? Mr. Picciolini.
It can be as simple as, from their youngest age possible, take them to eat different food, like Indian food or Japanese food. So maybe they'll grow up unafraid of food and unafraid of people who might be different, instead of just the chicken nuggets and grilled cheese that we might feed them. No, but I mean, seriously, it really is about, at the youngest age possible, exposing them to the difference in the world, and not erasing the difference. Traveling and experiencing culture, I think, was the most powerful thing for me, and for my children, that when they were very young, I decided I wanted to do. So it's those types of replacements as early as possible, so young, marginalized, uncertain people aren't searching for answers in negative places.
To parents, Father Desbois?
For me, I would say when the child or the teenager is fragile, by example, if he has problems in school, or if he feels bad with the dad, or if the family divorced, or anything who is not perhaps real, but he doesn't feel well, because he can be tempted by alcohol, he can be tempted by narcotic, but he can also be tempted by hate. Because for me, to hate and to say I am somebody who hates this one and this one and this one is stronger than cocaine and heroin, because you become somebody. And so for me, to be very careful when the teenager is very alone and fragile and isolated, because here he is in danger. And there's not only narcotic.
All right, great. Interesting question, which I'm just going to shift a little bit. Why is the ideology of hatred towards Jews the most central part of white supremacist ideology in the United States? Just in terms of the research we do in the Center for Jewish Civilization, it seems like blacks and Jews, to me, it seems they always are coupled. When we had Cornell Brooks of the NAACP, he said every time they noticed the N-word within 20 characters on Twitter, there would be the K-word. So, but let's take the question according to its premises. Mr. Picciolini, let's start with, why is the ideology of hatred towards Jews the most central part of white supremacist
I think it
ideology?
started in 1903 with a fraudulent book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was put out by the Russian Tsar to essentially diminish the Jews that he wanted out of Russia at the time. That book is still one of the most influential books in the far right globally, as well as in ISIS madrasas in the Middle East. I mean, they're also teaching this book as truth. Of course, it was debunked, many years ago, but it's still floating around as truth. I mean, I think as far as and I do agree with you, I think blacks and Jews are always part of that same conversation, but it's different, whereas they see the Jews as kind of the elite puppet masters, and African Americans and other minorities as kind of the purveyors of chaos, the ones who are, living in criminality, who are disrupting society, whereas the Jews, they actually will acknowledge as kind of being the elite puppet masters. Of course, none of that is true, but that is the narrative that they paint.
Anything you want to add to that?
In Europe, I think it's different. It's not black and Jews. The triangle today we see is that the people who hate violence against the Jews is also violence against the gypsy and violence against the gay people. It's a triangle. And today in France, we cannot believe there are many crimes against. Recently, by example, a rumor took Paris that the gypsy are stealing children. And people run to the court of gypsy, destroy houses, were beating people. And we had to say everywhere it was not true. Also, many people who publicly are gay and are beaten in Paris. It's completely out of our culture of today. And so in the same, I say that because when you meet the state people, they say, could you help because we have now a lot of violence against Jews, Gypsy, and gay. For us, we are still in the post-Hitler legacy because it's the same triangle of victims.
All right, so we have two questions here, one for each one of you. They're very good. For Father Desbois, what level of moral responsibility do you think people have for bringing sandwiches to shooters at mass killing sites or other low-level logistical support? And Mr. Picciolini, do white power leaders like Richard Spencer, Jared Taylor, etc., have the same types of trauma and self-hatred backgrounds as the lower-level foot soldiers? Let's begin with you, Father Desbois.
So yeah, when I studied the crimes against the Jews, we have studied now for 1.5 million Jews who have been shot. Me, I don't accept to take out of the responsibility of the little hands, of the helpers. By example, suddenly the shooter is thirsty and he wants to get vodka and to get sausage. And he will shoot people and he will pay the farmer with bringing sausage and vodka. So really, I don't think there is small guilt in a genocide. Guilt and responsibility must not be taken of that. Otherwise, you know, no killer can stay without eating. So, but if you accept to bring food on a killing site, you know, you imagine you bring your milk, your sausage, and that on the table, and the guy he has gun, and the shooters are waiting for the Jews. So, yeah, nobody is innocent in a crime scene.
I actually have spent time with Richard Spencer in Whitefish, Montana. He attended one of my talks. I actually invited him. And afterwards, we spoke for about 2 hours, and I learned quite a bit from him. You know, certainly not making any excuses for the man because he, you know, he says what he says and he inspires what he inspires and is accountable for that. But I did recognize that there were those potholes that existed, that there was an issue, you know, with his father, that there were issues with his wife and with his children, and that there were also probably some other, you know, psychological issues as far as, you know, potentially, you know, narcissism and things like that. But also privilege was his pothole. Privilege, extreme privilege, kept him in a bubble. His family, his mother specifically, is an heiress and still receives subsidies from Louisiana cotton plantations. It's true. His father is a world-renowned ophthalmologist and a surgeon living in Dallas. And they live apart. He's always had an issue with his father and seeking his father's approval. So, you know, I certainly don't know what drives a person to do the things that they do, but I can tell you that I've noticed in everybody that I've worked with that there are these potholes that need to be filled. And in his case, I do believe it was, you know, kind of an emotional issue with his father, potentially identity crisis, narcissism, and then, you know, this bubble of privilege that he lived in that kept him away from, you know, everybody else.
All right, we have two more. Again, compliments to the audience for some really interesting and almost peculiar questions, but I think these are quite good. So for Mr. Picciolini, is the special needs population, that is ADD, people who might be on the spectrum, more vulnerable to joining these white supremacist groups? That's very interesting. And Father Desbois, you spoke of hate, sex, and money. Do many male recruits have a history of sexual repression or some type of sexual trauma or sexual abuse in their past? Let's begin with Mr. Picciolini.
I don't know if they're more susceptible. I don't know that I'm qualified, or, you know, I certainly don't have a PhD. But I can tell you that about 75% of the people that I work with, and I've worked with hundreds, are living on the spectrum. You know, I'm seeing certainly some of the qualities of kind of unidimensionality, you know, very black and white thinking, obsession over a certain topic, but also typically because they're marginalized from society. They may be seen as socially awkward or odd, or they may be socially awkward and haven't developed those relationships in real life, where they may be more susceptible because they are just so marginalized that they're looking for something. But I also do believe that they are targeting these folks because of those qualities, They are going to depression forums to recruit people. They are going to autism forums because they're banking on the fact that people there are lonely, that they may not have a lot of friends, and they may be looking for something to fill them. So I don't know the answer to that. I would love to put that out there into the world, that we should try and understand this, because I am seeing a very large trend of this happening.
And obviously, as a father of a child on the spectrum, all these great kids don't become, most don't become neo-Nazis. Let's just be very clear about that. Father Desbois?
Me, according to what I see, I'm not sure there were frustration before. But when you want to give full power to somebody, full Superman, full Übermensch, full sex power is part of it. And what I saw also is that the freedom of sadical attitude, because I never saw so much sadism also in the German killing Jews or in the neighbors, but also in ISIS people, ready to anything. You must understand, a girl who goes out of ISIS today, she has been sold between 25 times to 35 times. And she had forced pregnancy, and they took the babies, and you cannot imagine what they did. And I think you are not to teach people to do that. When you legalize, you can be sadical. People have any idea to do it in a strange way and in the most awful way. So I don't think it's come from frustration. It comes from the top. You legalize it. You say, she's a slave, she's nobody, do whatever you want. And suddenly, by example, I was with a mother, she has an 8-year-old girl, and began to understand that something happened, and she said, this girl is the only survivor of a rape by 5 women, because they raped many girls and all of them died. You know, how you can ask men to rape girls of 5 years old, 8 years old, so, and to do it publicly. So I say that attraction of sadism is strong, in fact. We don't admit it, but it's strong.
I would just add to that, I think it's really important what Father just said is, this behavior is learned and it's adopted, and many times it's not abandoned because it's what keeps them there and it's the only thing that they have. But also that, these people are so young that we have to learn to see the child and not the monster. And it doesn't matter if the child is 6 or 60, we're still dealing with that same brokenness. And if we can see the child behind the monster is just what they want us to see.
Yeah.
The child is what they hope we will see.
All right, so there are 2 questions about the media, which must come up. So let's take those in turn. I would like everyone to speak about the role of media platforms, especially social media, in policing. That's the key verb, in policing these movements. So defensively, what can these platforms do?
It's interesting because there is a group of, there's a thought that if we take them off these groups, then we'll stop them from communicating. And that certainly is not the case, because they'll move to some other platform or they'll create their own. And then there's also a school of thought that says, well, we want to keep them on our social platforms because that's how we monitor them. If we push them underground, then we'll never know what they're doing. I kind of look at these social media platforms. First of all, they're not government entities, so they can make whatever rules they want. But I see them as landlords of, let's say, a big apartment building, and they have lots of tenants. And if one tenant were to try and burn the place down every day, attack the other tenants, leave the front door open so thieves come in and steal all the UPS packages. I mean, they're just causing all these problems. It is the responsibility of that property manager, I think, to keep all the other tenants safe from that person. And likewise, social media, I think that we do need to find a way to deplatform the influencers who are spreading this propaganda, the lies and fake news and conspiracy theories that exist.
And before we get to Father Desbois, I want to remind you that at noon, our speaker, Ms. Kirsten Clark, is going to speak precisely about the question of social media and extremist groups in the United States. Father Desbois, social media?
For me, social media in ISIS had a huge responsibility. By example, when a guard, a French ISIS guard, and an American ISIS guard want to sell women, he take picture of each woman in the jail and he sell them by Facebook. And so, and today, every time we go in Iraq, we see the smugglers, and they are showing you the children are still for sale. So today, so I think we should do something because it's not only public propaganda, it's only criminal act through the media. Without the media, we couldn't sell all these women and children.
Now we have 5 minutes left, so this is one of those elephant in the room questions which we're going to get to in our final panel today with Daniel Pletka, Benjamin Head, and Bart Bonakowski. But I'm going to ask you very quickly, the question is, how has the verbiage of the Trump administration impacted the white nationalist movement? We only have a couple of minutes. Father Desbois, why don't you begin, and then we'll close with Mr. Picciolini.
Me, I'm not an American. And I have Macron.
What a cop-out.
I have Macron every day. So me, I would say something which surely not weighted, but actually I saw such a mondial attitude. I was speaking in South Africa 2 weeks ago, and everybody told me everything is bad because the president is terrible, and he took all the money, and he says that, and he says that. And when I go to Germany, they say the same thing everywhere. So I say, surely there is something. I'm not a specialist of Trump, but we must not under-evaluate the transnational movement. They don't care the borders. If they take advantage of Trump and Mrs. Merkel, of Macron, they will do it. But if Macron will lose the next election, they will do it again. I don't imagine Macron and Mrs. Merkel losing the election and all these groups will go down suddenly. It would be wonderful. It's not true.
Give me the question again, because there was one part of the question that I wanted to answer.
How has the verbiage of the Trump administration impacted the white nationalist movement in 3 minutes?
3 minutes. He did not create racism in America. It existed long before he was here. However, it was as if he kicked a bucket of gasoline over all the sparks that existed and created a massive forest fire.
How do you do that?
So a lot of the language that he used, even imagery during the campaign, from using the Star of David when speaking about when Hillary was a criminal, dog whistles and things like that, from retweeting, white genocide tweets and talking about South African conspiracy theories. He may not be coming out and saying what they say, but he is empowering them even through the things he does not say, through by not calling them out after a rally and equivocating them, by putting forth policies that were things that I would have been on a table jumping up and down about 30 years ago, and I guarantee you they are now.
So
and
Muslim ban, anti-immigration rhetoric.
Anti-immigration, building a wall, everything from being isolationist to leaving NATO. I mean, like all these things that are very anti-globalist. But I think more than anything else is his message, like Father said, is not just an American message. It is landing on ears all over the world because of the internet. And in fact, we saw the shooter in Christchurch who praised him as a symbol of white identity. So I don't need to point necessarily to his words. I can just point to the many white supremacists who are great supporters of his and the things that he does and are very vocal about that.
All right, wonderful. Before I give you some quick instructions and stage directions, could we give these talkative, generous, wonderful speakers a big hand?